last time I was running late, and I said I can't blame it on my kids. Once again, I'm running late, and I can't blame it on my kids. So, but I'm very excited to have Alan Ottaro here, and I've already had the privilege of chatting with him quite a bit since he's been here, going back to when we were planning these events, and it really is a blessing to be able to have him here with some of the work that he's been doing, not only in Kenya but across the world as well, and in meeting with in Rome as well. You've met the Pope, right? We were talking about that, yeah. And so he's and how blessed are we that his first trip to the United States is in the state of Rhode Island. Mr. Alan Ottaro is the founder and executive director of the Catholic Youth Network for Environmental Sustainability in Africa, SENESA, based in Nairobi, Kenya, and currently has 10 chapters in 10 African countries. He is also a member of the steering committee on the Global Catholic Climate Movement and serves on the Ecology Commission of the World Christian Life Community. Since 2015, he has served as a member of the Climate Change Working Group under the Justice, Peace, and Development Department of the Symposium of Episcopal Conferences of Africa and Madagascar. Mr. Ottaro is passionate about engaging young people and faith communities in promoting environmental sustainability. Please join me in giving a warm Rhode Island and United States welcome to Mr. Alan Ottaro.
Good evening. I'm very delighted to be here, and thank you very much, Ed, for the warm welcome. I'd also like to thank Bishop Tobin for the invitation to the Diocese of Providence, the Office of Faith Formation, for organizing this. To my friend Bill for helping to make the contacts, and it's been a wonderful host so far. It's taken me to different places, ensured that I got fed very well the last 4 days I've been here. So I've really been enjoying my stay here in Rhode Island. The next places where I go to, I don't think they'll be able to match the hospitality that I've enjoyed so far in Rhode Island. So this has been great. It's fantastic that this talk is on the feast of Pope St. John Paul II. Before I started, my colleagues and I founded the Catholic Youth Network for Environmental Sustainability in Africa in the year 2012. I had spent about 7.5 months doing an internship in an ecological education center in Poland. And so after this experience, when I went back to Kenya, I was inspired and motivated to do something about getting young people in Africa to explore Catholic social teaching, and especially on care of creation, on care of our common home, and how we could then live out this Catholic social teaching in a concrete way in our realities in the different countries in Africa where we are. And so I really feel that St. Pope John Paul II is really here with us, and is inspiring us and helping us to move forward in reflecting about these topics and these themes, which can be really challenging and difficult, but giving us the hope that our faith can help us and can sustain us to, in fact, concretely show the love and faith that we can extend to our brothers and sisters locally, but also across the world. When I was reflecting on this theme of ethical consumption, it just occurred to me that I usually don't go out shopping frequently, and sometimes when I meet with my friends or I meet some new people and I'm listening to young people talk, and they speak about shopping as one of their hobbies. Okay, that is strange, because I normally go out to the shop when I need something. And other than that, I don't go to the shop. So besides the fact that I usually broke most of the time. I'm going to share a few perspectives, some of which I've encountered personally, but others which my colleagues in the 10 African countries where we have a presence have shared with me, or the concerns that I hear when I go to different meetings on the African continent and abroad that relate to Africa and different parts of the world on the consumption and also production, because it can be challenging to speak about consumption without the production element of it. And so one of the things I want to start with, broadly, is on food and agriculture, and to narrow down to example of cocoa production in West Africa. And so Valentine's Day is a very popular holiday in the world, certainly in Kenya, popular with young people. And one of the things that is sold most is chocolate and flowers on Valentine's Day. But then these two things also tend to be, to have significant impact on, so chocolate has a significant impact on deforestation and has eliminated lots of forests and biodiversity. And because statistics say that about 3 million tons of chocolate are consumed each year. But in Africa, Ivory Coast and Ghana in West Africa are the two largest producers of cocoa, which of course then is used in the production of chocolate. But there are many issues in West Africa regarding human rights, the rights of workers. So going back to the principles that Dr. Kolosi so eloquently brought forward in helping us to lay the foundation, and I thank him for laying that foundation very nicely for these concrete elements that we will be reflecting on. And so child labor is one of the biggest concerns in the cocoa industry in West Africa. Many children are working, especially in the harvesting season of the cocoa itself. And some of the numbers, as Ed said, that I'm going to present some situations that can be shocking, but I hope at the end we'll also have some hope. So about 2.1 million children in West Africa are working, of course, illegally in the physically taxing cocoa harvesting. 2.1 million. Now, for me, when I read or hear some of these statistics and reflect that every single child, it's not just a number, but there's a story every single child. And when I see and I reflect on the potential that each single child has to contribute and to make some contribution to Africa, it's a saddening situation. And something that, because then they don't go to school, and they're locked in this vicious cycle of poverty, which they can't get out of. Because if they cannot attend school, when they become adults, most likely also their children will not have the opportunity to attend school, because then they will not be able perhaps to afford it, or they may not have the disposition to realize that it's important for their children to go to school. Now, a lot of the companies that work in the cocoa chocolate industry, like Cargill, Olam, have taken advantage of lack of enforcement and corruption within government. The topic comes again. So, it's not for lack of laws or regulations in these countries. Many of these countries have some of the most beautiful laws and regulations on paper, on the books. But there's no enforcement of those rules and regulations. Many of those countries have signed even international treaties on the treatment of children and workers and the rights of workers and so on. Now, when I was looking at some of the numbers also in terms of the money that comes from the chocolate bar. So if you buy a chocolate bar for let's say $5, give an example, 44.2% of that amount goes back to the retail industry. 35.2% of that is to the chocolate manufacturers. 7.6% of that is to the grinding and processing, so still in the countries of origin before it's exported for the production of chocolate itself, and only 6.6% goes to the cocoa farmer. 4.3% taxes and marketing board. In this case, as an example, the marketing board of cocoa in Ghana or Ivory Coast, and only 4.3% is earned in taxes and money goes to the marketing board, and 2.1% in transportation and traders, the ones who move the crop from the farm to the cooperative societies and then sell in bulk to the big companies that buy for export for production of the chocolate. But it's most of the raw material, the cocoa itself, is not produced or is not manufactured on the African continent. It's not manufactured in those countries. It's exported to Belgium or Switzerland. And so you hear, oh, the best chocolate comes from Belgium. And you think, but they don't have any cocoa. How and to break this down, so these are just percentages, but in Ivory Coast, cocoa farmers earn around 50 US cents per day, and around 84 cents per day in Ghana. So that's what the 6.6% of the value of one chocolate bar translates into in actual value. And that certainly is a violation of some of the core principles of Catholic social teaching that Dr. Kolosi laid out. Still on the theme of Valentine's Day, so that's about chocolate, some kind of overview. Now move to flowers. And Kenya is one of the largest producers of cut flowers, also for export to Europe and other places in the world. And my hometown is about an hour's drive from a town called Naivasha, which is like the base or the hub of the horticultural industry. So a lot of the big companies that deal in the cut flower industry are based in this town called Naivasha, which is a very rich town in terms of the biodiversity, but also in terms of the people who live there. Naivasha has a lake called Lake Naivasha in the Rift Valley. It's one of the freshwater lakes within the Rift Valley ecosystem in Kenya. But because of the presence of this big cut flower industry, some of them illegally extract water from the rivers that flow into the lake, and in turn dump some of their waste back into the river system that flows into the lake. So, and this is true because today, with Bill and other colleagues from the DEM, I had the opportunity to visit a wastewater treatment plant. And I was sharing just some of the challenges that we have in Kenya in terms of wastewater treatment issues and the pollution, that we simply do not have the infrastructure to ensure that the wastewater is treated properly before it goes back into the ecosystem. And this is one of the challenges in Naivasha at the moment. Some of those companies will do what they call, or they like to refer to as, corporate social responsibility. So they will build a school or a hospital. In Naivasha, the company sponsored a soccer team called Oserian, which is no longer there, by the way. And they will use those examples to say that, okay, yes, this is the impact for operations of our work, but you see, we are doing something for the community. We built a nice school. There's 300 kids who are going to that school. But if you think about it critically, it's really not their place to provide the schools. If only, in the case of the example of cocoa, if only 4.3% is going back in taxes, then it means that there is a problem there because they are not paying their fair share of taxes. If 44.2% goes back to retail and a whole 35% goes back to the manufacturer. And those statistics will very much apply also in the cut flower industry. And so if they pay their fair share of taxes, then the government and the state will be able to build proper schools and do its proper function of what is required to do. And therefore they will not be in a position to say, but you see, we are providing a school or a hospital and sponsoring a soccer team. One of the other major issues that we have in Africa, and especially in this case in the Democratic Republic of Congo, relates to the situation of conflict minerals. Some of you may have watched the movie Blood Diamonds, which deals with the situation of diamonds from West Africa, from Liberia, Sierra Leone, and the connection of mineral, extraction of mineral resources and how it fuels conflicts in different parts of the world, but in this case, in Africa. Now, the Democratic Republic of Congo has some of the biggest reserves of important minerals for the electronics industry. An example of one of these is coltan, and the Kivu region. Kivu is in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So we've got the North Kivu province with Goma as its capital, and then the South Kivu province with Bukavu as its capital. And the Democratic Republic of Congo is such a huge and vast country. My network we have colleagues in the eastern part of Congo, in Bukavu and in Goma. And just to give you in terms of the size, it's actually closer for them to come and meet with us in Nairobi in Kenya than for them to go to their own capital in Kinshasa. It's closer for them to reach Nairobi, even though they have to travel all across Rwanda and Uganda to reach Nairobi. And just how, in terms of scale. And so these two provinces have coltan, which also produces the world 60 to 80% of the world's tantalum, which is a metal extracted from coltan. And it's one of the minerals that is required for our mobile phones, for our laptops, lithium-ion batteries. Most of the things that we use every day in terms of keeping in touch, to communicate, and so on, but then this region has also been inflicted or suffered from many decades of unending conflict, because many of those mines are controlled by rebel groups, which then, of course, also again use child labor in many of those mines. One estimate I read before was that about 40,000 children in some of the mines in the southern part of Congo, are working in those mines, and it's a huge issue that also the Committee on International Justice and Peace of the U.S. Bishops' Conference is trying to address, or has been addressing. So in my research, while preparing, I came across this letter written by the Bishop of Las Cruces. Did I say that right? Yeah. Most Reverend Oscar Cantu. And so he's the chair of the Committee on International Justice and Peace. And he wrote two letters. So the first one was, I think, addressed to the National Security Advisor. And this second one, which I have, was addressed to the Securities and Exchange Commission. And it's about the conflict minerals rule. So he says, as chairman of the Committee on International Justice and Peace of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, I write to urge the Securities and Exchange Commission to keep the conflict minerals rule related to Section 1502 of the Dodd-Frank Act fully intact and enforced. I didn't have enough time to read the whole Dodd-Frank Act, but as I understand, it refers to the ability of or keeping track of traceability of where these minerals are coming from, and ensuring that human rights, and that they are not conflict minerals that end up in the supply chain of the electronics that we use. That's kind of the whole point of this act. And I know that a few years after the US passed this, the European Union also followed suit. And I know that the Catholic development agencies in Europe, under the umbrella of SIGSE, did a lot of work to bring advocacy and to get the European Union to adopt and to follow in the footsteps of the US in adopting that regulation. And he goes on in the letter to say that Congolese die every day in the illegal mines and at the hands of the armed groups that destroy communities in order to expel them from potential mining sites. The estimated death toll in the Congo is the highest since the end of World War II. And this letter is authored on February 23rd, 2017.
It goes on to say that the international community, including our own nation, non-governmental agencies, and the church, provides emergency assistance to displaced and traumatized persons and families. Assistance that has real financial costs that do not appear on the balance sheets of corporations. So I don't know if that partly answers one of the questions that came up before on how the church is responding or how vocal it is on some of these social justice concerns. And I think that there's sometimes a lot of work that goes on in the background that does not necessarily find its way into, for example, homilies or into the forums, public forums that we might sometimes normally go to. And you sometimes have to kind of search and find the certain documentation or letters to discover that, oh, actually there seems to be a lot going on, and a lot of good advocacy work that's really going on. So just to quote another paragraph that I find also really interesting is, so still from the letter of Bishop Cantu, and he says that church leaders established 20 monitoring units in eastern Congo to study mining operations. They have seen the unsafe, dangerous, and deplorable conditions under which many people, including children, work. With armed guards standing over them, laborers are little more than slave labor. Church leaders have also seen the terrible environmental damage caused by these mines, leaching toxins into the soil and water so that villagers have no safe drinking water and their farmlands are destroyed. These social costs are simply unacceptable. So it's, when you reflect, it's shocking to think that the mobile phone that I have in my pocket, that it may be connected to a mine somewhere in Congo, where children are working, where even the adults who are working there are working under armed guards from either rebels or the Congolese National Army, where those mines are, polluting the only water sources that are available, or coming from where communities have been displaced from their lands so that corporations can come to explore for minerals. It's really something that is difficult to comprehend how these things can be going on in a world that's supposed to be more connected. We're supposed to be more aware of what's happening, and we have instant information. And this brings me to the issue of awareness, of education. And I'll use the example of the crisis of poaching in East Africa and in South. Rhinos for their horns and elephants for their tusks. Now, a lot of the demand for the rhino horn was from Southeast Asia, where some people have the belief that the rhino horn can cure different types of diseases like cancer and so on. While in reality, the material of the rhino horn itself is keratin, which is the same material of our fingernails. So if our fingernails had the material that could cure, produce medicine for cancer, then it just shows you the lack of awareness about what really is in the rhino horn itself. And there was an interesting study that was done. So some community groups had the opportunity to visit some of those countries in Southeast Asia to kind of create awareness about the fact that before you get your rhino horn or elephant tusk, it means that an animal has been killed, a rhino has been killed, an elephant has been killed for the sole purpose of that, so they just kill it and they cut off the rhino horn and the rest of the carcass is left there, and that's it, and the animal now is dead, the rhino is dead. And one of the things they discovered is that some of the people who are consuming those products did not know that these are coming from animals. They thought, okay, maybe it's coming from the ground somewhere, or that if they cut the rhino, then it sort of grows back, and that the rhino still survives, or the elephant still survives. They didn't know that that was the crisis that was happening. And that's why it's really important to provide opportunities for creating the awareness of where
the products that we consume come from, what are the kind of the supply chains that they go through, and what can we do to be more aware and to make more conscious choices when you go to the store about what we're actually buying. One of the other things that is a big issue also is the palm oil industry. And traditionally this has been associated with Asia, but in recent years, Central and West Africa are also becoming places where the palm oil industry is aggressively expanding. Just like the other issues, there are also, the other examples I've given, there are also environmental and human rights issues, because companies lease lands from governments before speaking with local communities. And so by the time they go to the ground with some kind of contract and say, we're going to start doing production of palm oil here, or taking over this land, then they get in conflict with communities because the communities have their own land rights as well. But they have not been involved in the process of making the decision about whether to give out the land. And of course, then there's the destruction of rainforests to provide the space for the growing of the palms, for the production of the palm oils. And this has tremendous effects on the biodiversity, but also leads to other consequences. So for example, during the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, one of the reasons that was given for the spread of Ebola was the contact between humans and wildlife, like apes and monkeys. And part of the reason for that is that the habitats, natural habitats for the apes and monkeys are getting destroyed. So more and more they are moving into farmlands and getting into contact with humans, and therefore creating the conditions for the spread of zoonotic diseases that can easily be spread from animals to humans. So it's a whole cycle that generates other consequences that may not even be directly related to the first issue of the land itself. But then, with such outbreaks of diseases, then you've got the whole burden on the health system of those countries that have to deal with those disease outbreaks and so on. So let's see if we can have some hopeful signs to help us to move forward. So just today, I found out that there was a news article in one of the Kenyan online newspapers that was talking about the plastic ban in Rwanda. So they've had a plastic ban since 2008, but now they have just updated the law to ban all kinds of single-use plastics. So Ed was pointing out the plastic water bottles and urging us to not to waste them, to make sure that they don't go to waste. And in Rwanda, one of the things they've done now is that even if you're flying into Rwanda with your duty-free plastic bag, when you land at the airport, you might be summoned by the authorities, and you might think, oh, there's some taxes I haven't paid on this that I should have paid. I thought it's duty-free. But what they really would be asking is for you to take out whatever items you have in your plastic bag and destroy the bag. They'll give you a place for you to dispose it off. So they don't allow any kind of plastic into Rwanda. Now they have 3 months to get rid of, the plastic straws, plastic cutlery, all types of different single-use plastic items that you can think of. And I mean, these are signs of hope. If a small country like Rwanda can be able to make these advances. 2 or 3 years ago, Kenya also kind of tried to follow in that direction, and we have since banned single-use plastic bags, carrier bags, after a lot of debate and argument between industry and between industry, Kenya Association of Manufacturers and the government and community groups and so on. But eventually they were able to do it. So I think fostering a spirit of dialogue between different actors is very, very important, and working in a way that helps to build bridges, not just an adversarial relationship
which is something that I learned yesterday when I had the chance to visit Save the Bay and to listen to some of the stories of how they came to ensure that most of that bay is now cleaned up and provides opportunities for people to go fishing and to enjoy a clean and healthy environment. One of the things that my network, my organization, Sinesa, is trying to do is advocate for, and one of my colleagues is very passionate about this. He calls it Unbottle My Event. So whenever we have events or we go to diocesan events or there's ordinations and so on, he tries to get the people who organize these events not to bring plastic bottled water, but to have common points where people can then bring their reusable water bottles and fill them. And I think in Kenya is also, and most of Africa, it's very challenging because we don't have a lot of clean drinking water. Like you can't go to the tap and take that water and drink it and be confident that you'll be alive the next day. So, sometimes it's more of a practical issue that, so you want to take the bottled water because then you have some sense of confidence about staying healthy. But then we're trying to find different ways, different approaches that we can get people to adopt and to stop, reduce the amount of waste that we generate at our own Catholic events, so that if you start with ourselves and you're able to, it's easier to talk to other people about doing these things, because then they just say, but you had 3,000 bottles at that ordination last weekend. Why should we stop using this here? Using reusable shopping bags, for example, in Kenya it was very difficult in the beginning for people to imagine that they could go to their stores and supermarkets with their backpacks and have their shopping in there and then get going. So this is something that could be adopted easily, but also making those reusable shopping bags, for example, with the names of a parish group or a youth group, that then creates a sense of belonging, of community. But then you're making some real change by adopting a lifestyle change that actually makes an impact. Fair trade products. So back to the flowers and chocolate story, or to Valentine's Day. And one of the things that's happening now is that the industry itself that produces the chocolate or the flowers, they're trying to find ways to self-regulate or adopt regulations that helps them to be in line with ethical production and consumption. And one of those kind of the fair trade movement, which ensures that farmers get a fair income for their efforts from the farm, that they get a fair, that the incomes generated from the sale of the chocolate and other products, agricultural products, are reflected in terms of the effort and the work that the farmers put in, but also in terms of the impact on the environment, so that the cost of the product that you buy at the end of the chain reflects the cost to the environment, but also the effort and the labor that those who have produced this have put into that product. So, avoiding products that have palm oil, just making that conscious decision that, we look out for products, and also just, it needs a bit of something, kind of practice, but just having a look around the household and seeing, okay, so these are the products we use every day, consistently. What do they contain? Where do they come from? So if something contains palm oil, then try to find alternatives. The same products, similar products, but that does not contain palm oil, and therefore contribute to eliminating all these challenges and issues where the palm oil is, which is more convenient for traveling. So, generally people want to have, more than one, electronic item. So I find that I have an iPad, but I also have a laptop. I have a phone. I have like a wide range of different electronic products, which, if you think about it, sometimes they sound pretty much the same purpose. So looking at how we cut down
on the different electronics that we're using, because there's one project called the Fair Phone project. So it's a company that tries to make phones, and they try to ensure that the whole supply chain, right from the mines where the elements that make the phone are coming from, that they are sourced in an ethical way. And of course, the Fair Phone is generally more expensive than the conventional phones, because there's that effort in terms of ensuring that the process before you get the phone in your hands is one that is clean, is one that does not include conflict minerals, child labor, and so on. And so if you go online and you just type Fair Phone, you can see some of the examples and efforts that people in different, people are trying to make to resolve some of these situations. But then buying fewer and not having to buy the newest iPhone that has just come out, when the current one that you have still works fine, is an example of what we can do concretely. One of the kind of slogans that we use in the environmental forum, different environmental forums in Kenya, that I hear a lot is think globally, but act locally. So taking action locally is perhaps certainly the most important thing that we can all do. We can be aware of the global implications of what's happening, but it's not enough to just be aware of the global implications, but to see how my local actions can then gradually make an impact into changing the global situation. And so buying local, whether from Rhode Island, New England, or the USA. I've had a joke in Kenya because we've got a lot of now Chinese industries and Chinese presence in Africa. And so I had this joke once that that God created the earth and everything else was made in China. Because every other product you look at is it's under license from some country in Switzerland, but then made in China. So buying locally, that's a challenge that we all have. I'd like to conclude with something from Laudato Si, the encyclical letter Laudato Si, and this is from paragraph 222. And Pope Francis tries to help us to adopt an attitude that can help us, in fact, to live these sort of practical elements that we just pointed out. And one of the things he says is, from 222 of Laudato Si, is that Christian spirituality proposes an alternative understanding of the quality of life and encourages a prophetic and contemplative lifestyle, one capable of deep enjoyment, free of the obsession with consumption. We need to take up an ancient lesson found in different religious traditions and also in the Bible. It is the conviction that less is more. A constant flood of new consumer goods can baffle the heart and prevent us from cherishing each thing and each moment. To be serenely present to each reality, however small it may be, opens us to much greater horizons of understanding and personal fulfillment. Christian spirituality proposes a growth marked by moderation and the capacity to be happy with little. Sounds familiar to some of the other quotes that we had before, right? It is a return to that simplicity which allows us to stop and appreciate the small things, to be grateful for the opportunities which life affords us, to be spiritually detached from what we possess, and not to succumb to sadness for what we lack. This implies avoiding the dynamic of dominion and the mere accumulation of pleasures. And to conclude with 227, where Pope Francis says, one expression of this attitude, so he's talking about the attitude of less is more, of the spirituality helping us to live contemplative lifestyles, is when we stop and give thanks to God before and after meals.
I ask all believers to return to this beautiful and meaningful custom. That moment of blessing, however brief, reminds us of our dependence on God for life. It strengthens our feeling of gratitude for the gifts of creation. It acknowledges those who, by their labors, provide us with these goods, and it reaffirms our solidarity with those in greatest need. So Pope Francis proposes something that seems very simple, just to stop and to give thanks to God before and after meals. And to just think, so this plate of food in front of me, that there is a whole chain of people who've been involved in bringing it to my table, and it's coming from the gifts of creation. And that's something that I think all of us are able to do, can easily do, but with that spirit of contemplation. So thank you very much.
Questions for Ellen? I think we have one in the back.
Thank you very much for all that you're doing. What have you found successful engaging youth in these issues through your organization? So what approaches have been successful? What motivates them? How do you give them hope?
One of the things that I've been learning in the last 5 years since we started the network, of course, the core of our work is looking at, getting young people to address environmental issues from the lens and perspective of Catholic social teaching and care of creation. So dealing with concrete environmental concerns and so on. But then we find that these things are also connected with a lot of other social and economic issues that the young people themselves are going through. So in Africa and in many, certainly a lot of African countries, the youth population is very, very big, which results in the problem of youth unemployment. Youth population is about 70%. 70% of the population in Africa is below the age of 35. So, that creates a lot of social and issues. Governments have to figure out how to create employment or, create an environment that then employment can be created for young people. So when we go, we make a presentation about we need to preserve a certain forest or, look after issues to do with waste and pollution. And then the question always is, so how does that help me to earn an income for my family, my community? So we're always trying to make the linkages between the different elements of life, and it's not just one kind of issue looking at it in isolation. It's really connecting the different things and saying that as a young person, your creativity and your innovativeness, in fact, can be great for example, working in renewable energy like solar, doing trainings on hands-on energy efficiency, for example, how to assemble solar lamps, solar street lights and things like that, which in many places are needed. Lighting and energy is a big need in many places in Africa. So by coming and saying that adopting renewable energies is good for the environment, but it's also good for you in terms of opportunities for generating an income, because then you can earn a living from doing energy audits of buildings and helping people to understand how they can cut costs or how they can just basically have energy for what they need. So that has been one sort of important approach for our work. But also really getting, making the connection between, as I pointed out on Saturday, so there was a question about really how we get young people to be interested. And even this work that we do, my observation is that it cannot be successful if the formation of the young people in church itself is not well grounded. So if we bring and say, okay, we want to do
formation on Catholic social teaching and care of creation, if the young people themselves have not been properly formed before that, in terms of catechesis and sacraments and so on, then it will be very difficult to find fertile ground for Catholic social teaching on care of creation to sprout and to grow. So we all have to be sort of working together across the different departments, be it pastoral, be it the social justice departments and so on. There needs to be that synergy, that everything is connected, as Pope Francis says in Laudato Si.
Is there much production of solar panels, alternative energy going on in Africa? Would that be a source of work for young people?
Unfortunately, the production of the solar panels and the technologies themselves, most of it is not happening on the African continent itself. So we either have to import, or solar panels are imported from China, or from Germany and other places. So there's certainly a potential there for creating opportunities for young people if we find the means to do the production of some of those technologies in Africa. And one of the big topics that's usually discussed at international meetings, and that developing countries, Africa, Asia, Latin America, always raise, is the issue of technology transfer. That yes, there's this, we have sunshine, a lot of sunshine in Africa and so on, and so there's always that in Africa you should be adopting renewable energies and so on. But then, so is that person saying that because they're the ones who are producing the solar panels and therefore they see a market, or are they saying it because they really believe that Africa can take advantage of the renewable energies that the continent has in abundance? And that's what sometimes creates mistrust of what really are the intentions behind what is being proposed. But certainly there exist lots of opportunities that have not been really taken advantage of because of the kind of structural situation that we find ourselves in the world, where it's one part of the world that is in control of the technological aspects and means of production, and does not want to share that with parts of the world that really needs it for their development.
Just quick follow-up question. So does the minerals used in the technology and in the metal, does some of that also come from Africa?
Yes.
Or the solar panels? So it's
Yes.
being exported from Africa?
Yes. So basically,
Yeah.
raw materials leave the continent in their raw form, and many governments that try to get these corporations and so on to do the production on the continent, they face a lot of pushback and so on. So they want to take all the raw materials and do the production and processing outside, and then Africa has to buy the finished product. And by the time it's coming back, it's very expensive for the person to buy it. I remember watching one documentary where someone went to a small village in Ghana or in Ivory Coast, where they produce cocoa, and showed a chocolate bar to a local farmer. And the local farmer didn't know what that was. He'd never seen a chocolate bar, so he didn't know what his cocoa is used for. And but the price of that chocolate bar, what he earns in a day, is not enough for him to be able to afford that chocolate bar. So those are the situations of injustice that exist in terms of the balance that we are seeking to achieve. So.
Can you say something about food security in Kenya? And it's in the climate, I guess, if there's an impact of that, or GMO too, genetically modified, do they use that?
Yes. So the whole agricultural production setup is one of the sort of areas that has a lot of challenges. Whether it's the impact of climate change on agriculture, a lot of the agricultural production is small scale, so we have a lot of small scale farmers in rural areas. Slowly we are seeing the sort of big industrialized farms models coming up, but still a lot of it is small scale, smallholder farmers who produce food for their families, for their local village, and so on. But then they find themselves under pressure from companies that are, trying to get governments to adopt, GMO seeds, for example, which they have the patent to, and you can only grow once, and that's it. But traditionally, African farmers, they will harvest the crop and then they will store some of the seed for the next season. But with the GMO whole efforts from these corporations forcing it down on a lot of governments, and then governments adopt it and sell this to small-scale farmers as the solution to the food security situation. And then they find themselves tied into that system where they are beholden to these corporations because it's only they who are selling, the seed, which can only be used once. So that's a big issue, as is the issue with chemicals, fertilizers and herbicides and pesticides. I think there was some highlights of the case. There was a case, I think, here in the US of someone who sued a chemical company. I forget which one it was. Because of the chemical Roundup. And so there's I've seen some groups in Kenya now saying, we're still using Roundup in Kenya. It's, nobody's saying anything, but look, in the US this is what's going on. So. And there's sort of many other chemicals which are banned in the US and in Europe, but then these corporations then find a way to get them to use them in Africa, in Asia, and Latin America. So that's, but then and this is where the paradox is. So the people who grow food for export, for example, to Europe and other places, they are very tight, tough conditions that they have to observe in the production supply chain of those products that are meant for export for sale in, for example, European markets. But then those same standards do not apply for food that is consumed locally, which often employs use of chemicals that are sent from those same markets that do no longer accept production of their food with those chemicals. So, but then it also goes with the whole sort of issue of leadership and corruption in government, and because the laws are there, as I mentioned earlier, but it's a question of who compromises who to make sure that things are not done according to the law.
I think, why don't we, was there one more question? Yeah, and if Alan, if you want to make yourself available for any other questions, if people have questions, please do come up, or for Dr. Colosi as well. But I want to, let's thank Alan for learned so much, and so much to reflect on in terms of our own. I like that concept of think globally, but then act locally. And it was helpful to kind of think about how some of our choices, with globalization, there's been certainly some benefit of like a big world coming closer together, but there's also been some not so good things. So I think that it's helpful to reflect on that. So why don't we thank both of our speakers again, Dr. Colosi and Alan. Quite as far, but that's okay. But thank you so much for both of you for contributing to our local effort here, and just know that all these notes that we're taking, these conversations that we're having is going to make their way to Bishop Tobin and impact the conversations that we're going to continue to have. So I want to thank each of you as well for taking the time to come out here, and we'll hope to see you on Thursday evening at Community Prep School in Providence. And the topic for that will be the impact of climate change on the inner city. So that's going to be at this Thursday at the Community Prep School. And so hopefully Alan will be able to get some sleep between now and then. But thank you so much. Everybody have a great evening. Let's close in prayer in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord Jesus, we thank you for the opportunity to come together. We thank you for the ability to know you and to love you. Help us to bring your love out into the world, and help us to clearly discern your will, that we may, through your grace, transform the world and be better stewards of creation that you've entrusted us with. We ask this through the intercession of Mary, our mother, as we pray. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. St. John Paul II, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Have a good evening, everybody. Safe travels. Thank you.